Good afternoon. My name is Łukasz Szustak. I'm come from Częstochowa University of Technology, Poland, and I will be the chairperson of this session that focuses on accelerator computing. It is the topic 11 of the Europar conference. So today we have 3 short presentations. Each talk takes less than 15 minutes. But what is important, that all talks are pre-recorded, and now we will play the video of every presentation and during this session. After each video, after each presentation, we will have short live question and answer session with the presenters that are ready to answer your questions. But remember, if you want to ask questions, you should use Slack channel only, space where you can type your question, and after the presentation, I will try to ask this question to the presenters. So I think we can start to play the first talk called cuDTW++ ultra-fast dynamic time warping on CUDA-enabled GPUs. That will be given by Bertil Schmidt from University of Mainz from Germany. So we can start the first video.
Welcome everybody to the presentation of our talk about the paper cuDTW++ ultra-fast dynamic time warping on CUDA-enabled GPUs. This is a joint work of myself, Bertil Schmidt from University of Mainz, and Christian Hundt from NVIDIA AI Technology Center in Luxembourg. So let's start with a bit of background about dynamic time warping, or DTW. Is an important computation pattern or parallel computation pattern widely used for processing time series. So the basic algorithm finds kind of the optimal alignment of 2 time series. And this is a very similar algorithm to the optimal pairwise alignment of DNA sequences, for example, like the Smith-Waterman algorithm, with the difference that we deal here with real valued data and use Euclidean distance to compare 2 values. This is based on dynamic programming and has a dependency relationship when computing a DP or dynamic programming matrix where value depends on the left neighbor, upper left neighbor. And we have observed that previous CUDA implementations of DTW are not optimal or not efficient. And in this paper, we propose cuDTW++, a new highly efficient CUDA-based dynamic time warping kernel, which is based on warp intrinsics for fast communication between threads and can achieve, as we will see, close to peak performance on modern GPUs. It's also publicly available on GitHub. Some more background about dynamic time warping. In dynamic time warping, we basically set up a DAG, a directed acyclic graph, which is of a quadratic size, so n times m, where n and m are the length of the 2 time series that are compared. Here in this example, we have 2 time series of length 4, so we have a 4 by 4 matrix, and it's weighted matrix, so weighted DAG. So each node in the DAG has a weight, which is the difference between the time series values at that position squared, so Euclidean distance. And in this DAG, we want to walk from the upper left corner to the lower right corner. and find the path which has the highest accumulated weight. And this is called the optimal warping path. And often we are also just interested in the cost of the optimal warping path. And the cost of the optimal warping path can be computed by dynamic programming. And here we see the recurrence relation of the dynamic programming computation, where you compute a two-dimensional matrix M, and the value J prime in this matrix can be computed by choosing the minimum of the left neighbor, and upper left neighbor, and add the weight at that position to this minimum. And yeah, here I also have an example of this computation. And initially the first row and the first column initialized with infinity, except for the upper left value, which is 0 initially, and then the cost of the optimal warping path is stored in the lower right value. And the warping path itself can be reconstructed by a traceback procedure. Bit of background about related work and Wavefront relaxation. So in Wavefront relaxation, you kind of use the dependency relationship of this dynamic programming computation, where you have the dependency of a value of the left neighbor, upper left neighbor, and then you can compute minor diagonals in parallel. So these diagonals here in blue, each value can be computed in parallel, for example, using a different thread. And in previous work, and also in this work, we will use one CUDA thread block to compute one diagonal. In our work, a CUDA thread block would just consist of warp or even a sub. In previous work, related work, UCR-DTW, the state-of-the-art CPU approach for dynamic time warping. Zart et al. Were the first to parallelize that on CUDA, but they do not use a CUDA thread block. They just use one CUDA thread per dynamic time warping score calculation. So this is highly inefficient due to excessive global memory accesses. Then Wavefront parallelization scheme was proposed in the cudaDTW software, and the paper can outperform Zart et al. By over 1 order of magnitude. And in this cudaDTW, each CUDA thread block computes one DTW score, whereby threads compute cells along the minor diagonal in parallel, and the necessary data transfer is done through shared memory. So in this work, cuDTW++, we also use a Wavefront, but we eliminate the need for storing intermediate values in shared memory, and instead we are using, we do not use shared memory at all, we just use thread local registers to store the data, and communication is performed with warp shuffles. Here a bit about the warp shuffle. So the important warp shuffle operations in this work is shuffle down sync and shuffle up sync, where you can move a value stored in a register of a thread to other threads. So either to down or up. So important here is to the left neighbor or to the right neighbor, and this can be done with this single instruction. This is much faster than shared memory. So our parallelization strategy, again, we compute a single score, dynamic time warping score per warp or even sub-warp if we use less than 32 threads. And the threads in a warp cooperate to compute all values of the DTP matrix in parallel. We use full in-register computation for the computation of the recurrence relation that I've shown before. Low latency communication of neighboring DP cells between threads through warp shuffles. And this replaces, we also replace frequent loading of time series values from memory by means of a communication scheme based on warp shuffles. And to support arbitrary time series lengths, we have a partitioning scheme. In addition, we have an early exit strategy based on warp level collectives and atomic variables for subsequence. Here is a diagram about illustration of the mapping of DP matrix cells, computation of them to threads. In this example, we have P threads of warp or subwarp, and we compare time series Q and SI, and we use here K equals 4. So this is an important parameter. So 4 cells per thread of the current row are computed at the same time. And in this example, these are the red cells. And to compute the red cells, we need the blue cells of the previous row and also some values of the row before the blue row, which is this gray colored cell. And most of the computation can be done without any communication with thread local registers. And the dotted lines, these are communication between threads, and this is all done with warp shuffles. The two time series compared are yellow, so the time series S and the green time series Q. Note that the time series Q also needs to be communicated with warp shuffles in every iteration step. Here again, a partitioning scheme to support arbitrary time series length. So the number of registers per CUDA thread is limited to 256. So in order to support arbitrary length, you need a partitioning scheme where you output the rightmost column to shared or global memory and then read it again in the subsequent step, as illustrated here in this diagram. Let's have a look at performance evaluation. So the first evaluation is a database scan, where we scan a data set. This is called the cylinder bell funnel data set, which is well known in the data mining community, using queries of different length. And in the upper left picture here, we determine the efficiency of our kernel for various values of K using 32 threads and using different time series length. And you can see that if you increase the value of K, you have more internal computation while the amount of communication remains constant. So when you increase K, you get a higher efficiency, and for K equals 32, you actually can get over 95% of the available performance of your hardware. This all includes data transfers over the PCI Express. And this is based on a GV100 GPU, and we use CUDA 10.2 with C++. And then we also compare the performance in the table here to the previously fastest program, cudaDTW. And you can see that we can achieve speedups of between 15.9 and 12.2. Both softwares executed on the same hardware. Another performance evaluation, subsequence search. There you do not have many independent time series, but you just have one very long time series, in this case an ECG signal of 22 hours, streamed ECG signal, and then you want to find out a subsequence or sub time series which is most similar to your query. And we compared the runtime for that with cuDTW++ compared to the state-of-the-art CPU program UCR-DTW, and we can achieve here very significant a speed up also with the early exit version that we have implemented of over 5,000. Conclusion. In this paper, we have introduced a fine-grained parallelization strategy for dynamic time warping, which can achieve close to peak performance on modern GPUs. I've presented results for Volta-based GPUs. Very high similar efficiency can be also achieved on the new Ampere GPUs, which we have also measured in the meantime. We employ thread local register files as a cache, which removes the bottleneck of previous implementations which use shared memory, for example. And data is communicated through low latency warp level collectives. We propose a partitioning scheme and an early exit strategy for subsequence search. And we can outperform state-of-the-art algorithms on the GPU by 1 order of magnitude and on the CPU by 2 to 3 orders of magnitude. It's publicly available on GitHub, and the approach can also be extended to other DP-based algorithms like what I mentioned before, sequence alignment for DNA. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to get some feedback on the paper.
Okay, so thank you for watching the video. It's now time for short question. I check the Slack, but I don't see any questions. But I have one. So the question is that, can you comment the methodology of performance evaluation? How do you measure the attainable performance in contrast to theoretical peak performance? I mean, you show quite good results. You prove that your code returned better results. But my question is about the measurements of the performance. Can you comment it?
Yeah, can you hear me? Mateusz?
Yes, we.
Yeah, so this measurement is hardware specific. So we look at the supported instruction set of the hardware, and we look at the.
You prove that your code returned better results. But my question is about the measurements of the performance.
Yeah, I understood that. Yeah, can you hear me? Yes. Mateusz?
Yes, we.
Oh, there's a delay. Yeah, so this measurement is hardware specific. So we look at the supported instruction set of the hardware, and we look at the.
You prove that your code returned better results. But my question is about the measurements of the performance.
Yeah, I understood that. I think there's a problem. Can you hear me? Yes. Mateusz?
Yes, we.
Oh, there's a delay. Yeah, so this measurement is hardware specific. So we look at the supported instruction set of the hardware, and we look at the.
You prove that your code returned better results. But my question is about the measurements of the performance.
Yeah, I understood that. I think there's a problem. Can you hear me? Yes.
Some problem.
Mateusz?
Yes, we.
Oh, there's a delay. Yeah, so this measurement is hardware specific. So we look at the supported instruction.
Okay, so I think we had some problem.
Yeah, there was a problem. Always repeat.
Yeah, exactly. So I think now it's okay. Can you try to answer?
I can try again. So we measure the performance by looking at the instruction set of the GPU. and the required instructions for calculating the equation. And so the arithmetic instructions are, in this case, 4 instructions. So, and the assumption is that you require these 4 instructions minimum to calculate a cell in the dynamic programming matrix. And then by multiplying that with the 4 instructions are required, and multiplying that with the data sizes of the dynamic programming matrices that you compute, and then dividing it by the number of cores and the clock frequency, you get a peak performance for the specific architecture.
Okay, so if I understand well,
then you compare that to the measured performance, and then you can see how far away you are from this ideal performance. Are required, and
okay, so for me it is enough. So I would like to thank you again for your video, your talk, and how to answer.
You compare that to the measured performance, and then you can see how far away you are.
Okay, I see that the live streaming is still turned on. Okay, so.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I would like to thank you again. I think now we can go to the second presentation, second video, which is called Heterogeneous CPU and
welcome to my presentation
processing.
On heterogeneous CPU and iGPU processing for efficient epistasis detection. My name is Rafael Campos from INESC ID, and let's get this started. So this work is based on the notion of single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs or SNPs, which are structures that are part of the human genome. And by looking at a pair of chromosomes in the same location, if we examine the gene and it contains differences in a single nucleotide, and this change is present in a significant part of the population, we call this SNP. And these SNPs, different SNPs, can interact with each other to cause a phenotypic trait. Several diseases have been shown to rely on this process, such as Crohn's disease or Alzheimer's. So it has important implications for human health to explore, detect which SNPs interact to cause which phenotypic traits. This process of epistasis has a order of k, which indicates the amount of SNPs interacting, and exhaustive detection of epistasis is when in a data set all possible combinations of SNPs are examined or evaluated for epistasis. These methods are very accurate, although they are demanding computationally. And it is of our notion that using heterogeneous CPU and integrated GPU systems can provide an alternative to the more traditional CPUs and discrete GPUs used for this end. The objectives of this work are thus to develop a framework for single and multi-objective exhaustive search for epistasis, and these heterogeneous CPU and iGPU systems. We will adapt an existing algorithm and optimize it for this architecture. Then we will experimentally test this framework in different scenarios, both using one device or more than one device simultaneously. And hopefully we will provide some insight into the trade-offs of using this architecture for performance, but also power consumption and energy efficiency. Here's an overview of the contents of this presentation, and we will start by the problem formulation. So the case control datasets provided contain samples of several SNPs, number m, and also a phenotype value for a number of samples or patients. Each SNP value will be 0, 1, or 2, depending on the alleles that form it being dominant or recessive. The phenotype value will be 0 for control or 1 for case. So When doing exhaustive search, every single combination of different SNPs must be evaluated. Therefore, the search space will grow according to this formula, where M is the number of SNPs and K is the interaction order or epistasis order. For each combination of SNPs, objective functions are used to indicate the likelihood of epistasis happening. These objective functions are based on biological criteria, and two of the most widely used objective functions are the K2 score and mutual entropy, which will be used in this work both for single objective optimization, where only one function is being optimized for, and multi-objective, with the two functions being used. Let's now look at an overview of the algorithm being used for epistasis detection. This algorithm consists on a series of 4 steps identified here. The first step consists on generating a combination of k SNPs to be evaluated. The SNPs are represented in the dataset in a binary representation, where each SNP has 3 binary arrays indicating the values for either 0, 1, or 2. And in this case, we have k equals 2, therefore 2 SNPs in each combination, in this case x and y. These SNPs will be evaluated by going through all n samples and looking at the genotype values for each SNP and also the phenotype value for each sample. And using these SNPs and the phenotype and a series of logical operations and also population count operations, we can fill a frequency table, which will be used as a support for the computations involving the objective functions. The objective functions or objective function are use this frequency table to obtain a numeric score for each combination, which will be used to evaluate the combination either in single objective optimization, where the minimum of each objective function is used, or multi-objective, where all the solutions must fit inside the Pareto front to minimize both the objective functions being used. And implementing this algorithm in the heterogeneous architecture being used requires knowledge not only of each device in the architecture, but also the common memory subsystem. This architecture consists on CPU cores that have private caches, level 1 and level 2, and also an integrated GPU, which has execution units that are clustered in subslices and have access a common L3 data cache. Both this L3 data cache and the caches for the CPU cores are connected through a ring interconnect to the last level cache, which is common, and therefore these devices have a way of sharing memory. Let's now take a look at the heterogeneous framework used for epistasis detection. This framework is divided according to 3 different devices. First of all is the CPU master, which contains a scheduler, and this scheduler is responsible for going through every possible combination of SNPs to be evaluated and assigning them either to the integrated GPU or the CPU cores. This is done by, for the CPU cores, assigning an initial combination that will be iterated upon, and for the integrated GPU, assigning a vector of combinations that will be received by the GPU. This CPU master uses adaptive scheduling, measuring the performance in real time of the integrated GPU and the CPU cores and assigning work accordingly. For the CPU cores, the initial combination is received and all 4 steps of evaluation are done using SIMD instructions to construct the frequency table, and also for the score calculation and the evaluation are used lookup tables to avoid redundant scores. And each CPU core will keep their local solution or their local Pareto front. As for the integrated GPU, the SIMD instructions used are 128-bit wide, and the same lookup tables are used. The solutions are kept locally also, but only in the case of single objective optimization. As in the case of multi-objective optimization, the Pareto front is merged with the Pareto front of the CPU master. Finally, the CPU master, after all SNP combinations are evaluated, will gather the final solution by reducing the local best solutions for each device or the local Pareto fronts for each device in the case of multi-objective optimization. Now, looking at the experimental results, the experimental setup consisted on a CPU, an 8th generation Intel Core CPU with 6 cores, and an iGPU that contains 24 execution units organized in 3 subslices. 3 different datasets are used for epistasis detection with a differing number of SNPs and samples, and the results are organized also in 2 different epistasis order, k equals 2 and k equals 3. And every result will be presented using 5 different tests with the 3 different datasets and 2 interaction orders, k equals 2 or k equals 3, represented by these 5 bars. The first result presented will be the population count based algorithm running only in the CPU. And after that, we have the version that is the population count based algorithm running only in the CPU with vectorization enabled. This allows us to compare the effects of vectorization, and looking at these results, we can conclude that using vectorization in the CPU will lead to increased performance. When running only in the iGPU, we obtain these results, and when enabling the scheduler, dividing work between the CPU master thread and only the integrated GPU, not the CPU cores, we obtain these results. Finally, enabling the full framework allows us to obtain the results presented here in CPU plus iGPU. Comparing every result, we are able to conclude that the best result overall is obtained by the full framework, CPU plus iGPU, while the iGPU only obtains the worst results overall. These results are obtained using single optimization with the K-choose core, but when using single objective optimization with the mutual entropy objective function, we obtain very similar results. Looking at the power consumption results, we can see that the lowest power consumption overall is obtained by the integrated GPU. And when comparing the pop count and the pop count vec versions, we can see that enabling vectorization in the CPU will lead to an increase in power consumption. And when comparing all versions, we can see that the CPU and iGPU version has the worst overall results for power consumption, and these are much higher than, for example, the scheduler version, which has comparable performance. When looking at energy efficiency, we can see that the highest energy efficiency overall is obtained by the scheduler version, and this is due to the high overall performance of this version and its low overall power consumption. Executing in the CPU will yield higher energy efficiency results than the iGPU. Although it has a higher power consumption, it also has higher performance. And when executing in the CPU or the CPU plus iGPU scenario, we have better efficiency than the iGPU only version, and this is due also to this higher performance despite the high power consumption. When looking at the multi-objective results, using only the scheduler and the CPU plus iGPU scenario, we can derive similar conclusions where the best overall performance is obtained by the CPU plus iGPU. However, the scheduler version will have a lower power consumption and higher energy efficiency relatively. And now we reach the conclusions of this work. And we can conclude that exhaustive search methods provide high accuracy, but they have a performance impact and also an energy efficiency impact. But it is of our belief that the heterogeneous framework that is proposed in this work can lead to higher efficiency for these epistasis detection methods using heterogeneous architectures consisting on a CPU and an integrated GPU. We have obtained performance gains of up to 5 times relatively to the base CPU version, and energy efficiency gains of up to 6 times compared to the CPU version. Future directions of this work include extending this heterogeneous framework to hybrid architectures consisting of a CPU and FPGA, and also different CPU and iGPU systems, and also exploring the effects of dynamic voltage and frequency scaling. And that is it for this presentation. Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay, so thank for the speaker, thank for the interesting presentation. I will check about the questions on the Slack, but I don't see any question. But I have two questions. So the first question is that you present quite interesting results and interesting solution. But the first question is, why do you use iGPU? Since NVIDIA, we can say that is the leader of GPU accelerators. This is the first my question. So please answer if you are. Do you hear me, Rafael?
Yes. Hello, Professor. Thank you so much for the question. And well, the basis of this work was to use this heterogeneous architecture consisting on an integrated GPU along in the processor package along with the CPU cores. And while we have other people and other works using discrete GPUs, and in fact they obtain great results and great performance, the focus of this work was to use this heterogeneous architecture and exploring the unified shared memory potential of it, as well as its uses for not only performance, but also energy efficiency.
So you prove that it's a good idea to use integrated GPU, if I understand well. Okay, so I have another question about programming model. Can you comment it, because you use both CPU and GPU, can you comment how to use which programming model you use and why?
Yes, of course. Well, for the CPU implementation, to divide work among the CPU cores, OpenMP was the chosen programming model, while for the integrated GPU, using this Intel platform, we used OpenCL to divide work and attribute work to the accelerator, the integrated GPU. And there are other approaches which we can make use of single programming models such as OpenCL or even some versions of OpenMP. Not for each device, but for both devices. However, these are the most established programming models for each of the platforms. And when trying to obtain the best performance, we found that the better implementation was to use separate programming models.
Okay, so did you compare other programming model like OpenCL or using both platform or OpenMP?
We are working on implementations using OpenCL for both platforms, also using one API, which is a different standard being developed by Intel, and we are working on that in a collaboration along with Intel.
Okay, so thank you for your answer. For me, it is okay. I don't see any other questions on the Slack, so I would like to thank you again, and we can go to the last presentation.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Yeah, that is called SITS Bench, versatile cross-platform benchmark suite for heterogeneous computing, that is given by Sohan Lal from University of Bern, Germany. So please play the video. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome to my talk titled SICL Bench, a versatile cross-platform benchmark suite for heterogeneous computing. My name is Sohan Lal, and I am a postdoctoral researcher at Technical University of Berlin. This work is the result of collaboration with Heidelberg University, University of Innsbruck, and University of Salerno. The outline of the talk is, first, I will talk about the motivation for developing SQL Bench. Then I will talk about SQL Bench design methodology. In the experimental evaluation, I will show the microbenchmarking results, the comparison of two SQL implementations and their runtime overhead on two different platforms. Finally, I will draw conclusions. While SQL is a relatively new programming model with the different implementation reaching official specification in August 2018, there is a growing SQL ecosystem, including projects such as SQL Parallel STL, a TensorFlow port to SQL, as well as 4 major SQL implementations shown in the figure. The first open source LLVM SQL implementation, also known as IntelSQL. The second one is the CodePlays commercial compute CPP. The third one is the TrySQL, an open source project mainly funded by Xilinx. The fourth one is the HipSQL, an open source implementation led by Heidelberg University, which is also a collaborator for this work. Together, these 4 implementations allow a SQL program to target any CPU, GPUs from at least 2 vendors and FPGAs from 2 vendors. So if we look at the available SQL implementations and target platforms, then a programmer has a choice. Then the question is how to choose a SQL implementation and how do different SQL implementation perform for a given hardware and given code. So let's look at the further motivation for this work. SQL is a high-level single-source programming model that relies heavily on implicit behavior. SQL implementation use different optimizations and patterns that are efficient in one implementation may not be in another. In addition, performance implications are not consistently documented. Furthermore, regular tasks such as scheduling, data management are handled implicitly by the SQL runtime, therefore increasing productivity. While SQL runtime may automatically perform optimizations such as overlapping data transfer and kernel executions, it is not apparent whether any particular implementation actually employs such optimizations for a given code pattern. So again, there are questions that we would like to get answered. For example, will my SQL implementation overlap compute and data transfers? Will my SQL implementation recognize that data transfers are unnecessary in a certain case? What is the runtime overhead of different SQL implementations? To address this, we need a benchmark suite. So we present SQL Bench, a versatile benchmark suite written in SQL. The main goal of SQL Bench is to evaluate the performance of both devices and different SQL implementations. So let's first look at the SQL Bench design methodology. There are 3 categories to accomplish different goals. The first category is the micro benchmarks, a set of architectural micro benchmarks with different patterns stressing different hardware subsystems, for example, arithmetic or the memory subsystem. They have been designed to emphasize performance characterizations on GPU devices. The second category, we have applications or kernels. These are real-world applications from different domains such as linear algebra. The main goal of this category is to test the performance of different devices and SQL implementation for real-world code patterns. In the third category, we have SQL runtime benchmarks. These benchmarks are designed to stress the SQL runtime. This category includes multiple kernels that can generate different task graph and stress different aspects of the SQL runtime. In total, in SQL Bench, we have 62 codes that can be used for hardware characterizations and 9 codes to evaluate SQL specific runtime. The benchmark suite is open source, so if you are interested, please clone and give it a try. And if there are any questions, please reach us. Furthermore, I would like to stress that SQL Bench is just not a collection of benchmarks. It is a benchmarking framework for easy extension. For example, there are common command line arguments. A programmer does not need to rewrite the timing code again and again. There is an automated executions with the test profiles to support reproducibility of results and etc. etc. So let's look at the experimental evaluations. We use two platforms. The first one is the Intel Xeon CPU and second one is the GPU from NVIDIA Titan X. For software, we run our experiment on Ubuntu 16. We use HipSQL with Clang 9, LLVM 9 and CUDA 10.1. For compute CPP, we have 1.3 version, Intel OpenCL 2.0, CUDA 10.1. And our goal is to support all SQL implementation. However, in this paper, we evaluated to implement two SQL implementation, compute CPP with PTX and Spear backends, HipSQL with CPU, CUDA, and ROCm backends. So let's look at the results. First, we look at the micro benchmarking on NVIDIA Titan X. We present 5 distinct micro benchmarks designed to quantitatively evaluate various device performance characteristics through the lens of SQL. First, couple of notes. There are some missing bars. That means some runs did not produce correct results because of the experimental PTX backend in compute CPP. For example, couple of bars missing in host device bandwidth micro benchmark. Second, the compute CPP performance is split into 2 bars. The gray bar indicates the performance using kernel-only execution time, while the blue bar shows the performance using overall execution time. This was done to deal with an unexpected bug that we found in compute CPP PTX. Please read the paper for more detail. The HipSQL performance is always based on the overall execution time. So now let's look at the 5 micro benchmarks. The first one, the DRAM, which measures the achievable device memory bandwidth by copying single and double precision floating point values between 2 buffers. It can also measure the performance for 2D and 3-dimensional buffer, thus indirectly quantifying how efficient a mapping of high dimensional indices to the underlying hardware is for a given SQL implementations. The host to device bandwidth measures the transfer between the host and device memory. The local memory bandwidth is similar in spirit. The arithmetic and the SF benchmarks basically exercise the device main arithmetic units and special function units. As these are bandwidth and throughput results, the higher is better. Except the local memory benchmark, where both HipSQL and compute CPP shows similar results. Mostly compute CPP performance is worse compared to HipSQL, and we think this is primarily due to the experimental PTX backend, which is not fully mature. So let's now look at the compute CPP versus HipSQL on Intel Xeon. Figure shows that the compute CPP implementation outperforms HipSQL implementation for most of the benchmarks. These benchmarks are from the applications of the kernel category. The main reason for the higher execution time for the HipSQL is that some benchmarks use ND range parallel for example, the LRC and SP ND benchmarks, and ND parallel for cannot be efficiently implemented by library-based implementation such as SQL without a dedicated compiler support. Moreover, the basic parallel for and the hierarchical parallel for in HipSQL have higher runtime overheads for CPU, which we will see later. Compute CPP on average is 4.5 times faster than HipSQL. This figure shows the compute CPP versus HipSQL on NVIDIA Titan X. Figure shows that HipSQL outperforms the compute CPP on GPU. On average, HipSQL is like 2.7x faster than the compute CPP, and we think that the compute CPP performance is limited again due to the experimental PTX backend. Now let's talk about the SQL runtime benchmarking. We use two benchmarks to stress a sickle runtime. Each benchmark has many kernels that generate a different task, which we use to stress the different aspects of the sickle runtime. In the first benchmark called sequential task, we submit many simple kernels. All kernels require read-write access to the same buffer. Therefore, sickle implementation needs to execute them sequentially. In the second benchmark called independent task, we again submit many kernels, but this time all kernels require a read-write access to different buffers. Therefore, sickle implementation can execute them simultaneously. As the kernels are very simple and trivial as incrementing a counter, most of the execution time can be attributed to sickle runtime, such as scheduling, latency, etc. So let's look at the sickle runtime overhead on GPU by using sequential tasks. We see that for sequential tasks, both implementations show similar behavior for 4 different kernel invocation mechanisms, which are single task, basic parallel for, hierarchical parallel for, and range parallel for. If we look at the runtime overhead on GPU using independent task, then we see that compute CPP stack exhibits a higher runtime overhead compared to the Ipsical implementation. Moreover, the gap is proportional to the number of submitted tasks, which means that the compute CPP has a higher average latency per submitted kernel. The performance gap can be explained by lower scheduling overhead in Ipsical. So let's look at the sickle runtime overhead on CPU using independent task. What we see that compute CPP has a lower overhead than Ipsical. There are a couple of reasons. First, kernel execution mechanism is different in Ipsical and compute CPP on CPU. Ipsical uses OpenMP, and while compute CPP uses OpenCL. So basic parallel for and hierarchical parallel for in Ipsical are likely slower due to the OpenMP threads. Please note that the Ipsical single task does not go through OpenMP threads. In summary, we presented Sickle Bench, the first open source benchmark suite written in and for Sickle. We experimentally demonstrated the effectiveness of Sickle Bench by performing device characterization and evaluating efficiency of Ipsical and compute CPP implementations. Ipsical outperformed compute CPP on average by 2.7x on Titan X, and compute CPP was 4.5 times faster than Ipsical on Intel Xeon. While compute CPP performance on Titan X is primarily hampered by the experimental backend, Ipsical CPU performance is much lower because of API construct that cannot be implemented efficiently without a dedicated compiler. In the end, I would like to thank D4G and EPSRC for funding these results. Thank you very much for listening. I would like to answer your question if you have any. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you. Okay, so I think now it's okay. So thank you for watching the presentation. It was very interesting. Check, and there is no questions on the Slack. Yeah, but I have one question to you. Can you, because you present the, as you underlined at the beginning of presentation, cross-platform benchmark, was very interesting and useful, but can you comment your work considering novel platform, including, for example, novel Intel Xeon Cascade-like or novel EPIC AMD processor, or also NVIDIA Volta and other interesting architecture?
Yeah,
Thank you, Łukasz, for the questions and for also organizing the conference. Can you hear me? I just want to confirm first.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I think the main goal of developing the SQL bench, as I said, also mentioned in the presentation, was to, of course, characterize the different devices. Let's say the GPU devices, or you can also run these on the CPUs or on an FPGAs. And also at the same time, the bigger goal is also to compare the different SQL implementation as they are like coming up. They are still not that mature. So like regarding your question on different, let's say, target platform, I think one of the key finding that we found when we wrote this paper is, if you look at this, if you just pick up one single implementation, for example, compute CPP or the HipSQL, like it's hard to run it on all devices. Let's say some platforms are supported, and some platforms are not supported, or if supported with some limitations. For example, compute CPP, for example, you can run it on the NVIDIA GPUs, but let's say the performance is pretty bad for some reasons. So for example, now, yeah, I mean, from here, what you get is like, and if you, in contrast, take HipSQL, HipSQL is quite good when it comes to running on the GPUs, NVIDIA GPUs. I assume it will also be good for the AMD GPUs, because it supports the ROCEM backend, but for example, the CPU support is not that efficient, in my opinion. So for example, so at a high level, you can make guess in the beginning. For example, if you look at these two SQL implementation, what target platform you have in mind, and then you have, like, you can choose what you want to, which implementation you want to choose. Coming back to like more advanced architectures, as you said, such as the NVIDIA Volta architecture, or some from the AMD, then I think like we were let's say not really comparing the platform in our paper, but one could expect, let's say, from, for example, I can say with more confidence that, for example, if you choose the HipSQL implementation, it will relatively work compared to compute CPP better on the Volta architecture as well. And the reason is same, because the PTX backend support is not that mature for the compute CPP. But of course, we expect that with the more modern architecture, the results will scale.
Okay, so yeah. Thank you for answering. Everything is now more clear. Yeah. I will also check on the Slack, but I don't see question.
Yeah, if you have any question or anything regarding the benchmark uses or any help, we'll be very happy to help in this regard.
Okay. Yeah. So we can finish topic 11, track 11. All presentations are finished, I think, successful. So I would like to thank you for the participant, and special thank you for thanks for the speakers and the organizers as well. Everything was okay. So thank you very much, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
And I would like to invite you all to room A for the keynote that is about to start soon. Thank you.